Welcome to the Expat Empire Podcast, the podcast where you can hear from expats around the world and learn how you can join them. Hey guys, before we get to the interview, I want to remind you that we're offering free 30-minute consulting calls to anyone interested in moving abroad. Whether you're thinking about retiring somewhere warm, starting the next chapter of your international career, or even becoming a digital nomad, we're ready to help you think through the next steps in your journey. Send us a message at expatempire.com and schedule a call today. With that said, let's start the conversation. Hey Kate, thanks so much for joining us today on the Expat Empire Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to have a good conversation of what it's really like to live in Denmark. So yeah.
Exactly, and it's a place that I've personally really enjoyed visiting, so I'm super excited to hear about your thoughts on what it's like to actually live there, and of course how you're helping people do that through your business as well. But before we dive into the Denmark portion, I'd love just to hear a bit about your overall story, if you give it to us in kind of a nutshell, where you're originally from, where you've lived so far, and where you're currently living.
Yeah, sure. So I am American as well, such as yourself, and I come from Michigan. I come from a very small town in the middle of nowhere. So if I give that name, no one's going to know. But if I say Detroit, everyone knows Detroit. So we're going to say I'm from there, or I come from a small village from Michigan. Yes, long story short, I've lived in Europe for about 13 years now. I've lived in Germany. Currently, I live in Denmark. I came to Denmark to be with the love of my life. Denmark was an accident. It shouldn't have happened, to be honest. I was studying abroad. I decided to stay in Germany to do my master's. And then, I through a mutual friend, I met the love of my life and decided to reinvent myself and come to Denmark. I have my Master of Arts in Humanities within European Studies. Just means political science of the EU and economics. And what I do now is I teach internationals how to communicate their value to Danish companies in a Danish cultural context. And what that just means is job search strategies based on my experiences. And I focus more on the cultural context and also just focus more on the practical sides when it comes to job searching as well, because it's my own story. It's my own experiences. I've had before I'm doing what I do now. I was in sales. I was in sales in Denmark for 4.5 years within the startup sales industry, and had more than 5 jobs within 4.5 years, which is a lot, crazy a lot, maybe too much. But I wouldn't be doing what I am today without those experiences. That's really my story in a nutshell.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, going back to the very beginning, starting, I guess, with Germany. So how did you end up getting the interest in moving abroad and to Europe and to Germany in particular? Maybe there's a longer story there from, when you were very young, or maybe it happened at, a snap of the fingers and you just moved over to Germany. So I'd like to hear about your beginnings and interest in living abroad.
Yeah, so really my experiences or wanting to move abroad, it's always kind of been inherent. Like I have just a very curious nature, and I always wanted to know what was on the other side. And as being an American, we're always interested in our ancestry, like where do we come from, right? And I have on my mother's side, which is Polish, and my dad's side is German, and so I had that interest to want to do it, but it was always a bit suppressed because I come from a very conservative religious community in Michigan, and they don't really understand the difference between communism and socialism. So that or like being a socialist democracy, and that can actually work together. So they were a bit confused by that, but anyways. And really what kind of pushed me toward that edge of like really saying, I'm just going to do this. I don't care what my family says. I had 2 exchange students that came to my high school. One was a Dane and one was a German. And we did everything together in high school. And once they have confirmed my ideas and beliefs on life and how I want to live, they're like, oh yeah, that's totally okay. And I was like, really? this is fine. Like, you don't judge me for this. And they're like, oh yeah, totally. Like, we're totally rooting for you. Like, no problem. So, and then that kind of got me to give an excuse to come to Europe. And I came to visit my friend from Denmark, and came to visit him back in, oh my God, that was like 50, it's been a long time now. It was like about 11, 12 years ago, when I first came to Copenhagen. I was 18. And just went for it, and I loved it, and said, you know what, I'm going to come back. And so I took Germany when I decided to study abroad, when I did my bachelor's at Central Michigan University, was because essentially it was cheaper at the time. The euro was much, much cheaper than the Danish krone. Now the euro and the Danish krone are about the same in currency right now. It's not that big of a difference right now, to be quite frank, probably because of COVID. But yeah, that kind of pushed me over the edge to say, like, this is where I want to be. And then once I studied abroad, and saw how Germany was, I was like, oh, this is actually really cool. I want to come back. Like, I want, and I knew that if I came back, I was going to come indefinitely.
Right.
So then I went back, did some courses I need to finish up for my bachelor's, came back to Germany and finished up my bachelor's while I was in Germany from Central Michigan University. Was an au pair, applied for a master's program in Flensburg, and I got in, and then the rest is history, really. So, yeah.
Yeah. So how did you decide to pick the city of Flensburg to do your studies and to study that major in particular?
Yeah, honestly, I knew I wanted to continue my studies with European studies. I did my Bachelor of Arts actually as well in European studies, but that was more sociology, to be quite honest. And so I wanted something that was more political science, economics, and more targeted more about learning about the European Union. And where European studies for my bachelor was more like I would call it cultural studies, more or less. And so I was looking into different programs. I honestly went to Flensburg because it was cheaper, and it was a bit more academic. And it was really tough because there were a few other programs that I was looking into. There was one in Bremen that I was considering to do, and it was a 1-year program, and it was definitely a lot more practical, but it was just super expensive. And I just decided, well, I could do it in 1 year, but I also wanted to take the time to do my studies because I did my high school diploma in 3 years, and then I did my bachelor like within 3 years as well. And I thought, okay, well, maybe it's okay to, like, instead of feeling like I have to like speed through, like instead of going hardcore studies all the time that I've done in my life, I just decided that maybe I'll just take this to really take the time to do it, instead of feeling like I need to like go through my life very quickly, and wanted to really enjoy it. And also, I was really interested in the border studies. It was pretty close between my two friends, one in Germany and one in Denmark. And so Flensburg was just kind of that nice middle city. And so I thought, you know what, like, let's go for it and let's do it. I mean, I don't regret it. There are some, looking back, I was thinking like, well, I maybe could have done this or this major, but I decided to go for European studies because I really wanted to educate myself on Europe, and I felt that my education of Europe was lacking, especially within the cultural studies department, because I went to a private school, a religious school, and I felt I had to relearn everything completely. And I felt that my education was lacking in a lot of ways, because I was also taught, like, I'll give you an example. As part of the religion that I grew up with, I was taught that the European Union was a sign that it was the sign that it was like the end times and Armageddon. And it was like really like that one first chapter of like, okay, this is the first step to like there being one world government, and then that's the sign of the Antichrist coming, and so on. And then they thought, oh my God, European Union, that's the first step. And so I just kind of did it to rebel. So it was like, I was like, well, I'm going to find out what this really is. And then once I studied it, I was like, oh, this is actually really interesting, and I really like it, and thought it was an interesting concept. So it really was just more of like a re-education,
Mm.
really. And that's why I studied it, because it was what I genuinely was interested in. But like using my studies, like I never really truly used what I did. I don't regret it, and not at all. Like I
Mm.
really am happy that I did it, because I went from like I had a plan, right? And then my plan was to go to Brussels,
Mm.
work at an NGO, and go forward with there. And that was originally what my plan was for my life. And then love happened, and love kind of broke that plan a little bit. So you can't have everything control, like what you're gonna do, etc. Like sometimes you have to just go with the flow of life, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's
How,
why I did
yeah.
it. So in a nutshell. So
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And thank you for the more in-depth overview there. I'm curious if I could just take one step back on it. As you looked at that program, and of course, it sounds like it was very different from what you were brought up to believe or your initial education. How did your family look at this situation where you were moving all the way halfway across the world and to study these different things, especially within the context of maybe, especially in Germany, it sounds like part of your family was from there. So there was some history there. At the same time, it sounds like it flew in the face of what you had been taught growing up. So,
yeah, it really, I think a lot of it, I don't want to get too much in detail
mm-hmm.
of it, but a lot of it had to do like with my own personal life. My dad was a single father. My mother died when I was really small. So, and he had 3 kids to raise on his own, all under the age of 5. So I
Mm-hmm.
think for him, it was just something like being overprotective, I think. And maybe whether it was these from the religion or from his beliefs, or maybe he said things to, how to put it, yeah, just to kind of keep me in line. And I think a lot of it was because he really tried to protect me and shield me from certain things of the world that he was terrified of, because he did not understand. And if you're afraid of something, right, if you're genuinely afraid of something that you don't know or you hear about on the news or in media or on, like, you know, wherever wherever you're listening to the news and to your information, that can be genuinely terrifying for people, I think.
Right.
And I think he just really wanted to shield me from those things. And I really didn't want to be shielded anymore. And I just wanted to live my life and have my experiences. And I didn't want to be daddy's little girl anymore, you know, at the end of
Right.
the day. No, it's true. I wanted to
Yeah.
be my own independent woman, and I wanted to make my own mistakes, and really wanted to like be okay with that, you know, no matter what I did, like that I was going to be okay. And I had to, you know, break away from that. And honestly, like I didn't have a relationship with my father, and for like I didn't talk to him for 7 years.
Mm.
And it was a long time. And then it had to like my life turned around when I got engaged and got
Mm.
married, and now I have my 6-month-old son. Things have been turned around for the better, and he actually came to Denmark and realized, oh, like these are not, like, I think he's opened his eyes as well. Like when you come from a community as like conservative as where I come from, and then like come to a country that you're terrified of going to because you don't know anything of. And once he was here, he realized that I had a good life, that, you know, that things are good here, and that my husband is a good person, you know, and
Mm.
that he's like,
Yeah.
you know, like good people, and knew that I was in good hands. I think he then started to accept it. He might not like it. I mean, who likes their daughter to be on the other side of the world? I don't think any parent really does, to be honest with you.
Right.
But at least he accepted it, and he accepted my life choices, and that's all I wanted, you know, wanted from him. And now we have built our relationship, but a lot of it had to do with, you know, forces of nature of him being married to another woman who pushed to have, you know, us to have a relationship again. Without her, I wouldn't be, you know, with
Mm.
really, like, I genuinely owe her so much. Like without her, I would not have the relationship to my father like I do today.
Mm.
And now, yeah, it's funny that, you know, with just taking that step to travel could and to could open your mind to so many things, so, and that changed, and it definitely, I think I changed him for the better. So
yeah, I think it's consistently shown, I mean, among our stories, but also the people that we know and the people that we work with and our friends and family, that travel really can change lives. And so it's awesome that we're able to share that in this, together, but in this context of the podcast. And I really appreciate, you going into your story about that, because I think that's a really powerful message. So I guess going now to thinking back on your time in Germany. So you finished your master's program there. You were able to get the studies that you wanted in a good university and a good program. So what was your thinking after that? It sounds like the plan changed from going to Belgium to working, to love got in the way in a good way, and things changed. But just if you could just walk us through kind of your path from there, what you did, maybe the rest of the time in Germany, and also, of course, how you ultimately made it to Denmark.
Yeah, so I really met my now husband when I was studying my master's degree in Flensburg. And at the time, to support my studies, I was a freelance English teacher and taught, it was mainly children English, but I also I did so many different things as an English teacher, and I think one of the most exciting things I ever did was teach the prison guards in Flensburg English. And I never felt so safe in my life. I knew if there was a prison break, I'm surrounded by guards, no problem, I'm all good. But it was really fun, and I enjoyed being an English, and I didn't have an English, teaching education, but I learned and was taught various methods by the companies and that I worked for, and it was fun. I really enjoyed it a lot, especially with kids, and that's how I supported myself. And then I tried to do my PhD at Kiel University, and it didn't work out. And then once my PhD wasn't really quite working out the way I wanted it to, it was mainly because of funding. And couldn't find the funding for it. My PhD was based on the Kin state minorities, and what Kin state mean is like the border region minorities. I was focusing on Slovak, Hungarian, and the German-Danish regarding to this European Charter for Regional Minority Languages, and how this charter impacted certain areas like education, for example. And so I couldn't find the funding in Germany for it to do my PhD. It was bloody tough. I then lost one of my biggest clients at the time, and it just kind of my world in a different way was falling apart. And so I didn't know what to do. So what I did was actually apply for a job in China. And it was because a friend of mine who was studying, actually, when I studied and decided to go to Germany from Central Michigan, he decided to study abroad in China and ended up staying in China. And then I remember talking to him, and Mark was telling me, you should really come to China. There's a lot of English, you have English teaching experience. You might as well just go for it. Just here are some companies I recommend, apply for it. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And so I applied, I had the interview, I was offered a job at a very lucrative deal to go to Beijing, if I remember, I believe it was Beijing at the time. And so I was like, okay, this could be very interesting. And so I was considering to accept that offer. And I remember telling my boyfriend, now husband, about this, and that I was sincerely considering it. And I remember it went really silent, and I was like, okay, so what are you thinking right now? He's like, why don't you come to Denmark and move in with me? And that really terrified me. When he said that, I felt like that was almost a marriage proposal. Not quite, but I was just like, okay. It felt to me at that time more foreign to move in with someone to another country, which was it was for me like a 30-minute walk, and I would have crossed the border to Denmark, right? Yeah. And that was more foreign to me than going to China. Because it was the next step of I've never lived with someone and taken the next step of our relationship, and to live with someone. And that would have been, at least to some point, the more natural step. But I also knew he did it because if I moved to China, our relationship would have been over completely.
Mm.
And I think he knew that too. And so when he did that, I think it was kind of like a last offer resort, because I think he knew that he would have lost me.
Right.
And so I remember one of the things that I did was to make a list of pros and cons of like, should I go to China? Should I go to Denmark? What should I do? Because I knew that if I went to Denmark, I wouldn't have any, I would have to look for something, right? And then I made this list about all these pros and cons. And I remember just like taking the list and just taking it back and like thinking, and I thought about it for some days. And then I thought of like a question that like really popped up in my head, and it just was like an epiphany. And I wrote on the bottom of this list, like, what would make me happy? And then I realized that the list didn't matter at all, like not one iota. And then that was really what determined me to go to Denmark, was just because I knew that he would make me happier than go to China. So that's the story of
Amazing.
my whole journey of going to Denmark and taking that step and not going to China. So yeah.
Right. So was he already thinking about then moving back to Denmark, or this was just like, how was the timing kind of working out, and how was it? Of course, he's from there, right? I guess so.
Yeah.
Is that sort of what made the decision? And did you move to where he was originally from? Kind of, how did it all work out?
Yeah, so maybe to clarify, he was already living in Aarhus, actually. So we met through a mutual friend from high school that I told you about earlier, from my high school in the United States. And so how I met my now husband or boyfriend was that we met at a party. It's a cultural party in Denmark called Fastelavn. So it's kind of like the Danish version of Halloween. So how it is really, it's like if you take the Mexican fiesta and you put the American Halloween party, put it together, you have Fastelavn. And it's in February. And I was invited to this party, and that's how I met from my friend back in high school. And so I decided to go to that party in Aarhus, which is like a 2-hour train ride from Flensburg to Denmark. And and that's how I met him. And he was studying in Aarhus. So we were doing like a weekend relationship. So we were seeing each other at least like every weekend or every other weekend, or if when I was working in the summer, which was my high season, maybe I would see him for like a week or two in the summer, right. And then go back to and we did this for like, oh gosh, we've been together since, it's almost 10 years now, not quite, but it'll be 10 years next year, February. So we've been together for 9. So yeah, so we were doing long distance for like 5-6 years, something like that.
Okay.
So
I
like
see.
a long time. So we were so it was like the longest relationship I think we both ever were in at that time. And so it was just that natural step. And we did talk of the idea of going for him to come to Germany, but his German wasn't good enough to get something. And he was also studying in Aarhus at the time, and he was doing his master's, planning to do his PhD. And when I did the research about Denmark, I kind of realized that I could probably get something without being fluent in Danish, right. And that possibility was higher than him getting something in Germany, especially with his field, because he's a physicist. So yeah, and it just was like, yeah, so that's one of the reasons why when he invited me, it was like over. It would have been just the next step or the natural step, since we were together for already quite some time in a long distance relationship.
So it sounds like you had a chance to visit there many times over those years. So how was your perspective on the life in Denmark and in Aarhus in particular? I mean, can you walk us through your perspective going in, and then what it was like in the first few months after you made the move?
Yeah, so I really I would say at the time I had a really different perspective of Denmark than I do today. It's like a 180 almost. I mean, I wouldn't say it's more of like a 90 degree, maybe not 180, but it definitely, I have a different perspective now than I did then. Then it was just more like, I went there to party. I went because I had my mutual friend there. I would go there to see him. We would party there. I would also with my husband, we would also just, or my boyfriend, I should say at the time, my husband now, and I would say that my perception of Danes, and it's still maybe the same today, that I still find that at the time that Danes were very kind, very caring, willing to go all the way to help you. And I still hold to that today, in that way that most Danes are willing to go out of their way to help you. Like, for example, I remember when I would cross the border and like have my luggage bag, that someone would always be coming to help. Like almost anyone would offer. And then when I would come back to Germany, no one would help me. Like no one. Like it was just totally like different. And I remember like one time I got completely lost going somewhere, and when I stopped, someone always helped me to ask for, when I was asking for directions. I would get that sometimes in Germany, but I felt that it was more accessible. Like if I felt like if I needed directions, I would had to do it in German. Whereas in Denmark, I felt like I didn't need to do it in Danish, and I felt like I can just do that. And because everyone spoke Danish, like everyone speaks English fluently in Denmark.
Right.
In Germany, I think it just depends on the area that you're in. And Flensburg is like a smaller town, so you're more forced to speak German, which is fine. And I was okay with it. I mean, I thought I was going to be in Brussels, or at least needed German if I was going to Brussels at the time. So it's like, yeah, it's a natural step to learn this language. So when I came to Denmark, when I came to visit, I never expected that I needed to learn Danish, at the time. So, I'm just trying to think of other perspectives. I felt it was more accessible to me in a different way, where it was more about the language, because English, everyone spoke English, and I had a great person, and I still have hold that perspective of Danes being kind and caring and so on, to some degree, especially being friendly. But yeah, and then when I moved to Denmark, I think some of those things changed completely, but I guess that will be your next question.
Yeah, just if you could finish that thread, I think that would be really helpful. Yeah, because that's kind of the big picture, right? There's the sort of fun weekend trip tourist sort of experience, and then there's the real deal. So let us know the real deal.
Yeah, the real deal. I would say that I think it changed more dramatically after a few years. It took a while to kind of realize the whole assessment or the situation, if you know what I mean. I never thought it would be so difficult to be with my now husband in Germany. It would have been easier for me to marry a German and get German citizenship. I would have definitely had German citizenship by now if if my now husband were German, and if we were in Germany, if this would be a completely different story, right? But I have known many friends who have found German partners, got married, and they have German citizenship now. This is not an issue. For me as an American, having a child, I never thought immigration. Even then, there was different rules now then, and it made it easier. And I was one of the last people who had a green card scheme. And it's different in the perception of what green card means in the United States compared to Denmark. And even this system doesn't exist anymore, where I was able to work in order to find something in my field. And that's what I was trying to do. It didn't end up going in that direction, but I still contributed to the economy. I wasn't working at a pizza place. I was working as a good salary and decent salary, probably even better paid than most people within the industry that I was in, to be frank. And yeah, and I felt that it was easy for me to get positions in Denmark, and that but I felt I was a little bit surprised at how hard it was to keep one. And I found that it was because and one of the things I learned was that Denmark is still quite an egalitarian culture. It's a monoculture. Immigration is still a new phenomenon in Denmark. It's only been since like the 60s or 70s. It's the similar history to Germany, where Germany invited Turkish immigrants and other immigrants to come rebuild Denmark after World War II. And in Denmark was the same, but then I didn't think that there would be racism and xenophobia in the same way, because you'd think that, Germany has learned that history, but if you're on the right side of history, you don't have to act that way. I think that's how how I feel is a little bit perceived. And I feel like, as someone who contributes to society, I thought I would be accepted much more openly. Like, I think even having someone as an American working in a company, in a startup, I felt like sometimes I was hired just so that then they can say, oh, we're an international company, and I was the only international. Like, there was no other ethnicities other than a Danes and one American.
Right.
And then they would say that, and I was like, really? Like, I would not consider you an international company because you have one American in your team and the rest are Danes. And so I kind of felt sometimes I was used as like a branding tool in that way. And I felt like I didn't really realize about how different the work culture was, like, compared to United States. And it took me years to find this out. And I was always finding, like, what's going on, like, what's wrong. And I think it goes both ways, right? I think, of course, you can say, like, it's all on them. Of course, some of it is on me as well. I'm not saying I'm completely innocent in the matter. I think that there's a lack of intercultural communications training. Like, United States is way ahead. I mean, United States is in a different place, right? Because we have a different history as Americans, or United States. Whereas Denmark has a very different history, and doesn't feel that they need to do that, and they feel like we as internationals we're the ones that need to conform, not the other way around. And so and I feel like it goes both ways. And I'm trying to think of another. I think it's really just, of course, the Danish language I thought would be easier for me to learn. I found out it's much harder. I was more pushed to learn German, I feel. And I was fine with that, but it's a lot easier to talk German because it has like in English and in German has the same intonation when you go up and down. But I like to make the joke that the Danish language is kind of like flatline. Like, it sounds like, like that heart monitor rate when it goes flat. That's how Danish sounds like. It's like, and maybe if there's like a little blip, like a little, but it'll be like very little. And it's like when you make a joke and it's like, haha, and I'm like, where's the joke? Like, I'm looking for the intonation, and I can't find the intonation for it. So I think that's what makes it so difficult, is that I can read, I understand, I can, have some sort of basic conversation, but I still, even to this day, being in Denmark for 5 years, I can't talk the way I used to talk in German, where I can have a political discussion, and to have that, and that still can be quite difficult in that way. And I think it's because Danes don't push people hard enough. Like, they do to some degree, but I think it could be done in a more gentle way with it. And everyone does talk about, yes, you need to be fluent in Danish to get a job. I think it's true to some degree, but I think it just depends on the field. I got something in Denmark without needing to be fluent in Danish. And I think if one becomes fluent in Danish, it not only increases your chances of getting a job, also just to be accepted and be promoted. There's so many different things. And I think it is talked about, but just because everyone speaks English so well, it doesn't feel it's pushed as heavily as it should be, if you know what I mean. It's hard to explain in that context. And I think the other thing is, I didn't realize, like, like living now, like compared to it was 5 years ago. I mean, it's become now more, it's right now, especially with the political parties and with the local election coming up in this fall, it's now about who can be the most hardcore in immigration right now. And but at the other hand, Denmark is screaming for highly educated people, and they say, yes, we want people, but then they want to be more hardcore in immigration. So I'm thinking to myself, well, if you want to attract people, especially highly educated, maybe make it a little bit easier when it comes to your immigration. And I never really would have thought like that I would have experienced, especially like sexism, because like Denmark is like there's so many great things in Denmark as well. I am being a little bit pessimistic right now, but I will talk about some of the positive things. Like I love the welfare system. I'm a huge advocate of it, and I think it's great. I love digitalization. I love that everything is super centralized. Everything is digital. It's one of the most digitalized countries in the world. I love, the idea of the social democracy, and there's, and these are the things I love with Denmark, to be able to pay it forward. Because, like, for example, I love that my taxes can help my people who are, disabled or so on, because, it's like in Denmark, it's the best country in the world to be disabled and to be handicapped. And because I have my husband's family, they have muscular dystrophy, and so they wouldn't be able to have the treat or the care. They wouldn't have the wheelchairs. They wouldn't have the handicapped helpers. They wouldn't have the cars to be able to get around, and that's subsidized, and that helps them. And so I'm really happy to do that, and also to know that my son, he will be one day have a free university education system, and that's great. And I know that he will have that chance to have that education, unless they change the laws in the next 18 years. Hopefully not, but and I think those are great things. But I know one of the things that will really bug me is that I know that Danish society will never accept my son, who is half American, half Dane, and that they will not consider him a full Dane because he's born, from an American. And they even have this term of like half Dane in the language. And it kind of gets under my skin a little bit. I mean, he is Danish. He will be a Dane, and he will be an American. But also it's about how he feels at the end of the day, and to give him that choice and not have society put a label on him. And also it's just like, with the immigration, xenophobia, also Denmark has now recently is taking away some of Syrian refugee status, where they will, when it comes to residency, some residents will be sent to detention camps, and will probably stay there because Denmark does not have a Syrian embassy. So that's like a huge deal right now, that the UN and the EU has criticized that Denmark is now allowing to take away these some of the Syrian refugees' residency statuses. So I and also there is still, in my opinion, some sexism, especially with my experiences working with startups. I never thought sexism would happen, because it's also Denmark has a great maternity system and also paternity. I mean, my husband's going to be on paternity in a month from now, and I'm so thankful for that. So I can go back to work and be able to have a co-working space and have a studio and everything, instead of the background I have now, and it's just like, these are the things that I never expected to experience, because you're like, especially when you come to Denmark, or when I was studying about Denmark, I was like, oh, it's such an open country, they accept me, like, when I'm at a party, things are like this, and it's like, and the welfare state, it's all, and I really imagined Denmark to be all unicorns, butterflies, and buttercups, and it turned out to be a different story. And I do love Denmark. There's so many great things of Denmark I love, but at the same time, it also has its baggage that I really hope one day these issues will be fixed. I mean, when it will ever be fixed, I don't know. I mean, every country has its own issues, but I really, there's some things I would say I'm very disappointed in, because I really truly thought it was something completely different than I expected, so.
Right. Do you feel like that's something that has been rising since the time that you moved there, or has this just been the case and it just has really good marketing? I mean, I'm trying to dive in a little bit, if possible, underneath the surface to see why is the marketing, and if you want to call it that, or the image of Denmark and what you thought going into it so different from what you've actually experienced. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it has been something within the last 5 years that has been growing, and it's mostly has been because of this of the Syrian refugee crisis.
Mm.
I remember when I first came to Denmark, that was when the refugee crisis happened of the Syrian refugees coming, from Syria and immigrating and starting to move north into Scandinavia, and that really started, in my opinion, started some of the xenophobia. I mean, it's always kind of been there, I think, especially we'll also call it Islamophobia.
Hmm.
And this has been, I think, deep down has been there, but I think it's also been triggered, looking back a little bit from the Muslim cartoon of Muhammad, back, I can't remember how long ago it was, but it was
Right.
definitely before the Syrian refugee crisis. And I remember when that happened, it kind of and then the whole world started, or the Muslim world started to criticize the Danish newspapers for this. I think Denmark has started to really resent and started to really take this stance on immigration, and it affects everyone, and also even the upcoming policies and change of Danish citizenship and things like this that will affect everyone, and I was also really surprised in some ways because, yeah, it's about freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and now, and Denmark promotes this and is like part of the Danish values and also Danish democracy. But now with some of the rules that are changing with the citizenship, it will make things more complicated. And I'll give an example of what I mean. So one of the rules, as I understand, that will be changing in Denmark is regarding the citizenship test. And you have to when you take your citizenship test, you have to ask, you have to know questions about culture, about history, like very similar to how you take a lot of citizenship tests around the world. However, they will be adding 5 more questions, and so they will be targeting more about what your values are, and so
Mm.
these are considered right values, and if you answer them wrong, then they're not Danish values. And what the
Mm.
critique is that these questions are more targeted towards Muslims than they are toward white
Right.
immigrants, or
Right.
from those who are not Muslim, right? So, and this is what is considered like, breaching freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and to be critiqued or not being able to get citizenship because you have certain beliefs and so on, and religious, yeah, it's a very complicated story. And I think this is definitely within, since I have been there, since I have been here, it's been harder and harder and harder. And I'll give you an example. And now, in order to get permanent residency in Denmark, you have to work full time the last 3.5 years within 4 years in being in Denmark, or the last 4 years of your residency, 3.5 have to be working full time. So that affects me in a different
Mm.
way because I've always, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why I've always struggled, because I've had so much pressure in order to, have the residence, to keep this residency. It used to be like 4 out of 5, or 4 out of 5 years instead. Now they've changed it to even to be a little bit tighter and stricter in that way. So I was always under this pressure to be full time and to keep a job, and that was so, and I was always
Mm.
wondering, like, what the hell, like what's wrong with me, at the end of the day. And so, and then, and actually, what it caused depression, and it
Mm.
caused me to break. I mean, it literally caused me to break, because all I'm trying to do is just like try to be with my boyfriend, now husband, and
Hmm.
fiance. And that's why one of the reasons I started, like, I do what I do now, is because I just said, screw it, I'm just going to be
Hmm.
happy, and that's what matters, and that no one should be determining what that happiness should be. I am I am working, I am contributing, and if this is not considered full time to the Danish authorities, so be it. I'm working hard to support and contribute to my family, to the relationship. I'm paying my Danish taxes.
Yeah.
So whether what I do is, and I don't, and that's what I understand is having this business does not probably will not prove that it's full time. So, and that's so difficult to prove. So that's why I
Right.
just said screw it, because it's going to change again within, like, because the rules have changed so much within 5 years, and it's getting harder and harder and harder. And it's always like, and I remember having a debate actually, and I've been in a lot of political debates recently because the local election is coming up here. And one of the politicians that I was debating with was saying, well, isn't like the fear that you have, because I was telling him about my fear. I always have fear that one day they will be so strict that, yeah, I will one day, you probably hear the happy back noises in the background right now with my baby, but like, it's true that I am sincerely terrified that I will be separated from my very cute son, where you can hear cute noises in the background, right?
Mhm.
And I'm genuinely terrified that the rules will be strict, something happens, and then they're going to say, sayonara, okay, like, okay, the baby is left with the husband, and we're just going to send you, yes, you're married, we don't care, we're just going to send you back to United States.
Mhm.
And that is something that terrifies me. And I remember the politician was like, well, like, isn't that just a fear? And I'm like, and not the reality of the situation? I'm like, well, the reality
Mhm.
is, like, you're making it, like, it's a fear because you're making things harder and harder and harder, right? If you're
Right.
making things harder and harder, that could be potentially a reality for a lot of internationals. It's not just me, it's just for a lot of people, who contribute.
Sure.
And so, yeah, and so, yeah, it's a long answer to your question, but it's a real concern, I think, for a lot of people here. So
Yeah, if you could talk just a bit about your experience there as working in sales for these different startup companies. It sounds like that was a rough road for you. And I mean, I only say that because I'm also coming from a very similar experience in Germany myself. I had 3 jobs in 3 years. So, I mean, we're pretty much on par job wise. So I'd love just to hear a little bit about, what that experience was like, maybe some of the challenges that you faced, and of course, then how it led you to now starting your new business.
yeah, so I would say that the challenge, like, I mean, I maybe to be clear about maybe the different reasons why
Mhm.
I was, well, they told me I was let go. Some were actually, some positions were temporary positions. I had temporary
Mhm.
contracts, so that's the obvious reason for one. Others were company mergers. I mean, if you work in a startup, I think if you do work in the startup industry, it is just a volatile industry in general to be in, especially in sales. And so, company merger, change in strategy, I would say the last position I take responsibility for, or I own up to, because I took a strategy I thought would work, it didn't, and it cost me my position, and that's fair enough. But I would say, I mentioned one of the frustrations was that I think it's more of the culture as something, having someone exotic in the way of, like, that is someone who is not Danish, and it was like, and the attractiveness of wanting to be an international company or saying that they have international talent, right? And sometimes I think, like, when they had me, they just were a little bit surprised and back, because I am a very, and the very, definitely when you meet me, I'm like a very stereotypical loud American to some degree, and I think also, like, I'll give another example. What was really tough. There's this philosophy in Denmark called Jantelov, or this law of Jante, and it's a philosophy from the mid 20th century, and this idea of being humble and not boasting or bragging. And I think as an American, like, when you work in an American workplace, you always want to be praised and you want to be accepted, and that you're told, oh, good job, like, not in the superficial sense, but there's a lot more, like, encouragement
Mhm.
in the American workplace, at least from my experience. And when I was in Denmark, it was just like, okay, this is your job, you're expected to do this, And if you do a good job, like they don't say it, and they just like, you know, you just do it. And there is no reassurance. And that was really tough, especially in sales, because I was doing like, one company I was breaking, like I was the only salesperson, you know, and we were doing like really well, like breaking sales revenue records and doing really well. But I didn't like, it was tough because I was also told, like one time I was told by my boss that it was like a bit much, and that like, you know, because I felt like I always had to talk about my achievements, because I really just wanted to be like, to be told I did a good job. And that's all I wanted is that. And I think that was like one of the very, very, and because I was seeking this out, they thought that I was maybe an attention seeker, and also that I was breaking this, and it's law of Yenta, and like boasting and bragging and so on. And it's funny because there's a lot of Danish companies who, or even the company I was working at for the longest time, for like a year and a half to 2 years, they were like, oh yeah, Yenta law, it doesn't like apply here. But in reality, it really does, and they don't really realize it themselves how much this philosophy applies, or how much it's integrated in the society. And it's just, they don't really know. They don't really they don't realize to what depth it really goes down to, or how much this philosophy has influenced the Danish culture and the workplace. Yeah, I think that was just one of the biggest challenges, I think, for me, that I didn't even realize till much later. And yeah, there were other reasons. I think that was mainly the main reason, is just like both sides just not understanding the work style, or like the different work styles that we're used to, because I wasn't used to and it's funny because everyone in Denmark is focusing on like personality tests, and like it's about being the right fit, and that this is more important than even if you have more experience and the skills and the competences to do that. But I think in some ways that's a bit flawed, because they might have thought of me as being the right fit personality wise. And not that I didn't have the skills for it, but they just like, you know, everything is based on gut feeling, right? And they never, and it was, I felt like a good cultural fit, or in the way of like personality, but then you don't take into consideration the different culture styles, and they don't understand how I used to work, even though what I was in high school, you know, that this is how like I'm used to working, versus, you know, but also I'll be fair, like I think like when I worked in Germany, I worked with mainly Americans when I was a freelance, you know, English teacher. So I was used to already working with, you know, with the Americans. And then when I would go working with Danes, it felt like in a different country. Because in Germany, yes, I did, like I wouldn't say that I had German colleagues in the same way, because I worked with American companies mainly, you know, who for teaching English. So it was almost like as if I were working in the United States to some degree.
Right.
You know?
If I could ask more about just then, how did you decide that ultimately you wanted to then build your own business, and frankly to help other people to come to Denmark, other internationals, because you're talking about all the challenges that you had.
Yeah.
Granted, you can tell them about those challenges, you can inform them, you can talk to companies, help them to be more accepting, but is it difficult to be like, hey, look at this really difficult time that I had. Are you ready? You know, how do you give that information, and how do you support and motivate people knowing how difficult it is, especially if they're not fluent in Danish or they're not familiar with the culture?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the story of maybe first we should go in the story of how I got into doing Career Denmark. It was a few years ago. I was already currently working at a company, and I remember I was complaining, and I was really unhappy working there, but I was just doing it to get the permanent residency, right? And I remember just talking to a friend and like just kind of complaining about the situation at the time. And he was like, well, like, how many jobs have you had? And I'm like, oh, you know, at that time, I think I had maybe like 4 or 3 or something, and within like a few years. And he's like, well, like, have you thought about doing your own business? And I was like, it's like, I don't want my own business. Like, no, like, I'm not a businesswoman. Like I said, I want no part of it. He's like, I'll tell you what, Kate, and here's the reason why you should have your own business. He's like, you are relatable.
you have had more jobs than most people in Denmark have. He's like, and you don't even speak fluent Danish. He's like, you have something, you have a teaching background, you could definitely take your methods and apply them to help other internationals in getting a job. You should sincerely consider it. I was like, I'll think about it. I didn't mean it, but at the time I was like, okay, I'll think about it. And then I remember I was sitting in Danish class, and I was let go. This is a while later, and telling her about my situation, and she's like, oh, you'll get something, Kate. Don't worry, you'll find something. And she didn't really mean it. I kind of felt that, but I was like, it's fine. She's also American too. And then it was like, not kidding, like within like a few weeks, I was like telling her that I got a new position, and I'm looking forward to this one, and hopefully this is the one that's going to stick. And she's like, okay, Kate. She's like, I'm going to admit to you right now, I didn't mean anything I said. I didn't think you'd get something within 2 weeks. And she's like, I have a PhD. I'm also American. I have been trying to get a job in Denmark for a long time now, and I have not gotten anything. I would kill to be in your shoes, even having a lucrative like sales position. How are you so good at getting positions in Denmark? She's like, seriously. She's like, I don't even know anyone who is as good as you. And I thought, well, and it really made me think, because at the time, because I didn't really, it made me really think hard, because I didn't really, I didn't think anything of it. And that was just kind of another seed that was planted. And then I thought about it after a while, and talking to various internationals who have had a really difficult time in getting a job, or even any job for that matter. And I said, okay, I'm going to do a motivational talk. I'm going to tell my story. And I set an appointment. I met with an organization, and then I talked to them and said, would you be willing to do this? Are interested in doing this? And they're like, yeah, sure. And this was before COVID, and also the second biggest city in Denmark. So it's not that big. I don't know on the top of my head. It's not like as big as Copenhagen, And more than 80 people showed up, and it was like super packed. People were standing to hear, and like 80 people in the room is like like is still a lot of people, and that's what was counted. And I was like, okay. I said, there must be something in this, right? So, and then I started doing workshops, and they were packed. Like every time I would have like 50 people in a room doing a workshop, and I was like, okay. I saw the need. Can this be done? And so, and then after I lost my most recent job, after doing this, and I was like, okay. I said, this must be a sign, and maybe I should just do it. And I became official of March last year. I was doing it for like 2 years ago. I was just kind of doing it to test the waters a little bit, and found that there's potential in it. And last year did really well for Career Denmark, and really, like, yes, I do like my one-on-one coaching, but my goal has always been to get my courses free to internationals, and working with municipalities, with unemployment insurance companies here, to work with various organizations, and been seeing this success in what I do. And and that's really the story of having my own business. Because you're right, like, having a lot of positions looks bad in a lot of ways, but I decided to not focus on the negative and focus on the positive, because I just realized that there are so many people here who are struggling, who are highly educated, and who are working in cleaning jobs, and there's no way that someone in IT who does front end education or software, or who is an engineer, none of these people should be working cleaning jobs at all, because they should be doing these educated jobs that are in high demand. Like IT is in demand here, engineering is in demand. And I've been seeing like a huge results on how to communicate and how to work in a way where it's more about, like, my method's more about helping them, and not only to teach them how to communicate their value, but also to help the way they communicate, to help Danish employers open their eyes a little bit to why they would be valuable and why they should hire them, and even if they're closed-minded, that then they're able to have that conversation to become more open-minded. It doesn't my method's more like, there's a saying, American saying that, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink.
Right.
It's the same, I can lead, I teach them the method that, to help the Danish employer to go to the water, but or to help them understand, but it's up to them, to the Danish employer to decide whether to take them or not, and it's also the way of how I teach things are, how to put it, in a way where it's also still like my style, or like it's still some American influence. Like, for example, I'll give an example of like one of the things that's a little bit backwards is here in Denmark is like there are still career advisors who teach internationals to put their nationality and their birthday on their CV. I'm not kidding you. And it's something that in the United States you would never do. Like, you never put in your nationality, you never, and like most English speaking companies, like especially UK, well, of course, but it's also because UK and United States have a different history, right? So, and Denmark has not had that history. And so they're teaching these things because in a Danish perspective, they're saying, well, it's because we want to see your personality. But what happens is that it's not about showing your personality. It's just giving an excuse to the Danish employer why they should not be hired. And it's because either they're Romanian or Bulgarian or whatever. And I'm telling internationals, take this out, because this should not be the focus. The focus should be about the value that you can give, not about your nationality, not about how old you are. This should just mainly be focusing on the skills and competences that you can bring to the company, and that should be the most important. And I'm already seeing a difference. And for me, it's not so much like I would love, and I really hope Career Denmark is going to do well, and I firmly believe it will, and I have faith it will. But it's also for me more about just making an impact to make change in how things are done, and I'm seeing results, and trying to get people to understand that that there is still racism in Denmark, there's still sexism in Denmark, and that especially in recruitment, and that certain changes need to be made, but it's only I can only do so much, right? So it's also I'm trying to make things on a bigger scale to say, look, this is what's happening, and this is why things should be taught in a different way. And I'm hoping one day that people will be open to that and have an open perspective, or especially municipalities and different organizations. But again, they have to want to drink it, man. They just gotta drink it if they want it, so
absolutely.
You can only do so much.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. It sounds like an awesome mission. You've had a lot of success so far. And I'm curious, in closing up our conversation here, if you had any other particular pointers for people that are interested in moving to Denmark, maybe to work there, or maybe through some other means, but where should they get started? I mean, where should they maybe try to find jobs, or even just try to make this move happen? If you have any parting words, that would be great to hear.
Yeah, so one of the things you need to know before coming to Denmark is to know how much you really want it. That's the most important thing. How much, and I'm serious, because a lot of people don't understand, how I came to Denmark, and the way I got to Denmark doesn't really exist anymore. It's a different system than how I did it, and it's completely outdated in that way. So really, the only way you can come to Denmark is to get a work visa, and unless and even and a lot of people think, oh, I can find a Danish girl to come. No, that's you're not guaranteed. Go to another country if you want something like that. Denmark is not the country for you then, if that's the case, to be quite frank. You really you need to look at something called the positive list. The positive list is a way for, there's a lot of different ways to come under a work visa, but the best way for anyone to come to Denmark is to look at the positive list, which is based on every 6 months from it's from the Danish Ministry of Integration and Immigration. You check it the 1st of January and the 1st of July. It updates itself every 6 months. And what it is basically the Danish government saying this is what is in demand in the market right now. They have analyzed the Danish labor market and saying that we need engineers, we need IT people, we need, I've actually seen preachers and I've seen organists. I've seen really bizarre stuff, what Denmark needs in the labor market. I was oh, if you're an organist, you can come to Denmark, no problem, So it's bizarre. And just basically what the positive list means is that they will process your visa fast. faster because you are, because you have a specific educational background. But you still need a sponsor, meaning that you need an employer to say that we're going to hire you and that they're going to pay you a fair salary. They have to meet certain conditions, and then then you can come to Denmark, no problem. And that is really like the advice that I have is like to really analyze the market, look at the, it's called NUI Denmark. It's NY and then I Denmark. I'll send you the link for you to put in this description below for people to look at. And it's in English, like almost everything, like on the internet, if it's something for Denmark, you can find a lot. When it comes to job portals, you need to and for one thing, even before you even think about job portals, you need to know not only that your field's in demand. That's one way to go about it, is from the education system, but also do research on what portals are best for you. Like if you are an engineer, it would be workindenmark.dk. If it's in sales, it would be jobindex.dk. And you need to find the portals that work for you and your field and industry, because Denmark likes to specialize. Like what if you're in a specific field, for example, if you want to be a teacher in Denmark, then you need to use a different job portal, to be a teacher otherwise, or if you want to be a pharmacist or doctor, whatever, you need to find the right portals for you, because some portals don't work for everyone. Even if Job Index is one of the biggest ones, they still have issues with keywords, and you get really random keywords that don't work. And you can do it in English, it don't matter, just do the research and find out, okay, even if it's not on the positive list, is there any possibility that I can get a position where a company is interested in sponsoring me, and it is easy. If you're an EU citizen, it will be so much easier for you if you have that EU citizenship passport. But if you're not an EU, you need to really work hard and just there's, of course, you can hire someone like me, but you can find things on the internet too. It's not the same as hiring someone who has the insight, but there's also information out there, and just do the research. And but if you want an insider training and so on, so then just go through the website and so on, or on the website portals. So yeah.
Thanks so much for all that great information, really helpful stuff. I'm sure our listeners want to find out more about you and what you're doing. So if there's anywhere they can find you online, please let us know.
Yeah, definitely. Just go to careerdenmark.dk and look and see what I have to offer. If it looks for you, if it looks interesting for you, I also have, of course, this podcast is going to be on my website, but there's I'm on a ton of podcasts. I'm on a ton of YouTube videos, a ton of articles that are out on my, if, for anything, even if it's not to book a session, just check out my website for all the content. Follow me on LinkedIn, my Facebook page, where there's content as well, coming in to get some tidbits and so on. And just make sure to follow me on the Facebook and LinkedIn platforms, or just check out my website if you want to have me and have my time. So
sounds good. We'll definitely put the links in the show description. Thanks so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Definitely, David. Have a good one, guys. And thank you so much, David. Have a good one.
Hey guys, don't forget to like our video, subscribe to our channel, and leave your comment below. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Expat Empire. We help people to move abroad through our personalized consulting services. For more information, check out expatempire.com. Thanks, and see you soon.